Digital transformation for collective well-being. That's a pretty pretentious headline, right? And I obviously don't have many answers, but I do have a number of questions. And I do think we need to start to discuss to a greater extent, because as we sort of are on the cusp of this major digital transformation, which has huge impacts on individuals, society, corporations, yet it doesn't seem like we have a whole of a society approach to this transformation. And since technology has no ethics, moral, and there's no guarantee that this transformation will be evenly distributed in terms of benefits, maybe it's about time that we do start to talk a little bit more about inclusive development. Now, I come from the corporate side, and I sit on a number of boards, so I guess my role is to speak about what's on top of the agenda on the in the corporate boardrooms. And I can assure you that this slide is definitely on top of everyone's agenda. This is the projection from Standard & Poor in terms of the average lifespan of corporations. And according to existing data, if you just extrapolate, then in 10 years, 75% of all of the major companies on this list will be gone. That's a pretty dramatic number. Now, these are US numbers, but Gartner has just posted the statement that during 2017, around the developed world, 20% of all market leaders will be taken over by a company that was founded at the year 2000 or later. 20% of all. So this is the speed of transformation, which is obviously changing a lot of things. And if we look at what's happened and the sort of patterns of these transformations, I do think there are a number of key learnings to talk about. And if you look at these companies and how they've changed markets, and you try to sort of define what happened, you see that so far, there is no industry that has transformed itself. None. All of them has been transformed by completely new entrants. And all of the existing companies have so far neglected to observe that change until it's too late, which is kind of interesting because by now it should be a pattern that's recognizable. But yet we sort of tend to forget that these are competitors, not new phenomena operating in another part of the business. Secondly, quite often these companies enter the market with minimum fixed assets. They find new ways of delivering their services. I'm on the board for Bisnode. Bisnode's major cost, sort of where we spend most of our money, is to buy data. Bisnode buys data, repackage data, and sell data again. Now, if you compete with companies like Waze, who obviously, as you know, you all donate your data to Waze. Waze has zero cost in buying data, whereas Bisnode has their major cost there. Obviously, it's a pretty hard position. It's pretty hard to change to meet that competition. And as we know, many of these companies also work as platforms. They have distributed products and services, which means that the growth is exponential. When other companies start to deliver on top of their platform, the growth is quite astonishing. And then again, with low marginal cost. And all of these things combined makes it so hard for the existing corporations to just change their business model, the distribution model, because actually these new companies quite often operate like a thin layer on top of these vast supply systems. And on this thin layer, they meet millions and millions and millions of users, and therefore get all the data, which is, as we heard, the new oil. And so it continues. And if we look at this change, now we have Nicholas and Google in the room, so I'll be a bit careful. But it's just interesting to see the major growth, obviously, both in market value and in brand value. But if you also look at, which is maybe more important, I think, for the future, the R&D spending. If you look at the top 11 R&D spenders in the US markets, 5 of them will be these companies. And if you look at the M&A on top of that, you see that these companies are so smart and deliberate in their way of buying talent, buying new technology to continuously also improve their R&D efforts through M&A, which means, who knows, but the thinking power that's aggregated within this company is just growing and growing. And on top of that, they have all these third parties that are really dependent on their platform to do their services, which means that they have sort of built very strong positions, and maybe primarily, once again, these thin layers meet all these numbers of people, which means they get all the data, which the third-party providers do not have to the same extent. Now, my point is that the companies that I work with, they have a very hard time understanding how do we compete against this? When do we cooperate? When do we compete? How can we best sort of make an effort? And what do you do when you're in a small market, in a small language, when this is a global competition? And also the speed of change, because when these companies now try to become mobile first really hard, then this statement comes, no, sorry, we're now AI first, and then everything changes again quite quickly. And just to sort of give a picture on the knowledge, I don't know if you can see, but this has number of machine learning publications by Google, and maybe Niklas can talk more about this, but it's quite impressive, like the research papers published by these companies. And in terms of AI, there were 140 AI companies bought by the big 5 technology platforms in the US since 2011. 140. 2 days ago, Apple bought another one for $200 million. There's a lot of knowledge gathered in these companies. And once again, with the companies that I work with, we're getting increasingly worried that we don't have this knowledge. We don't have this competence. And these are researchers, these are PhD, these are people with very, very specific and very valuable knowledge. And in Europe, we're very far from this situation, and it's becoming a worry. And it's not only about the US, because if we look at the Chinese big platform, we can see exactly the same growth, exactly the same situation, maybe even to a greater extent, dependent on what number you measure. So Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, they all have the same approach. And if you look at Tencent specifically, they now have 250 researchers in their AI lab in Shenzhen, and they're building a similar one in Seattle. We don't have AI labs in the corporations in this country. Hardly any company has. And if we're becoming an AI-first world, well, that's a serious problem. We have to find better ways to cooperate between corporations and research. So with that starting point, I just wanted to go through quickly 5 areas where I see companies that I work with that they have on top of mind right now, where they see a lot of change happening because the technology has such a huge impact on the business. And the first one is there, Zero UI. Because when Mark Zuckerberg says, as he did in April, that we're now going to build a computer-brain interface, and Apple buys Emotient, that supposedly is capable to do the same thing. Well, that might be far away, but if we just look now at what's happening with voice interface, it's sort of the beginning of the same thing, that we can talk to technology or interact with technology in a way that does not involve a screen or a mobile phone. And from a business point of view, it means completely new ecosystems, completely new platforms to sell your services, completely new interfaces to all the products that you've developed, which is an enormous change. And I think this growth of Amazon Echo is so interesting, that if you look at that little system that is voice interaction, and the projected sales is now 20 million units in the US this year. They sold about 10 before, so 30 million households are now getting used to talking to technology, because that's what they do, right? They talk to some sort of pretty basic, but still AI bot in their home. That's going to change their expectations forever in terms of user interfaces and how to interact with technology. And if you look at the number of skills on that platform, so skills, as you know, it's the apps. So if Apple and Google calls it the apps on the mobile phone, Amazon calls it skills, but it's the same thing. Services on the Alexa platform. Last year, Q1, they had 1,000 skills, 30 third-party providers that deliver services on Alexa. This quarter, they had 10,000, a tenfold increase of skills. It's just growing enormously because so many households are picking it up, and that means all these companies have to reinvent their interface. They have to define who are we when we're voice instead of a screen. That's interesting. Even more interesting is maybe what happens when AI is not one interface deliberately solving one thing, as I put up Amelia from IPsoft, which is now launched by the SEB Bank. She's called AIDA, but it's the same service. It's a customer service interface, a robot. If she's not solving one thing, but she's also the HR department in the company, because actually she knows exactly how this company is performing, and she can feed it back to HR and the performance reviews. And also, by the way, she can be the travel planner and the business support. She can be a lot of things in these companies. Right now, they're just solving one single thing. What happens when it's all intertwined? And what happens to organizations? What happens to workflows? What happens to a lot of things internally when we're getting there? And we're so close. Thirdly, a lot of discussions I have right now in the boardroom, it's about what do we do with all these possibilities to predict things with our data, when there's not only analytics that can describe what happens, but also what will happen, and also how can we make it happen, the prescriptive analytics. Because there are so many ethical questions in there, there's so many moral questions, there's so many legal questions, but yet the systems are there, and we see companies who are moving in this direction. And I don't know if you follow the dark ads placed by, supposedly placed by the Trump and his followers prior to the elections, where they managed to identify not only who will vote for Hillary, but why will they vote for Hillary, and what will make them change to vote for instead Trump. And once they found that, the prescriptive analytics, they could place ad individually targeted with misguiding information towards these individuals. Do we want that? Yes or no? But there are a lot of these questions, because when the systems become that advanced, there are things we can do that we maybe don't even want to do, but it will deliver results. And there will be a lot of discussions in there. I have on the slide my colleague in Finland, Mariana. This is a pop-up that I have in my Gmail, delivered by Crystal Knows. It gives me information about anyone that I'm meeting or mailing with. So I will get this pop-up saying we're 78% similar. How should I talk to her? What kind of language should I use? Should I be brief? Should I be detailed? Dependent on who she is, because this system analyzes our previous email conversation as well as social media. So it builds a profile of her, it builds a profile of our communication. Therefore, it guides me in terms of how I should interact with anyone I meet. It's not very smart, I should admit. It's not perfect, but it gives a sign of where we're heading. And what happens if every industry knows exactly who is walking into the store or meeting us at our websites or mobile interface? If we know exactly who they are and what they want, wouldn't we behave differently? Wouldn't we serve different services to different people if we can? And shouldn't we communicate differently if we know exactly who's in front of us? Moving on a little more quickly, obviously augmented reality just has huge potential, and I think primarily for industry it's all about how to change the design process. How do you reinvent the whole prototyping part, the whole sort of collaboration part of the first design phase, but also how do you change the service delivery when you have augmented reality? Because obviously you can send information to help people do things remotely, like Wärtsilä, the Finnish shipbuilder, is experimenting with sending glasses out to the ships. So if the ship breaks down at the sea, the control tower in Finland could project data layers to guide the service technicians on how to repair at least some simple things instead of flying in people to do it. It's just an enormous difference in what kind of services you can deliver. And finally, of course, it's the service robots. And I saw this number now that in 2020, 60% of the service robots will be in Asia Pacific. And it is interesting to follow how these robots can be used as customer interface. Because first, we just saw them as something such as stupid, clunky machines. But when they powered with things like crystal nose, they will know exactly who will enter the store and what their needs are. Obviously, they will be pretty smart service employees. And how will that change things? Yes, so just a snapshot of thoughts that I think will have a tremendous impact on business moving forward, and therefore there's a lot of need for knowledge and information in this area. And I just want to end up with a final thought about the third part that I see a lot of conversations going on right now, which is this increasing worry that how can we transform our society to be prepared for this change. And I just took this slide that you've seen this a million times, the World Economic Forum Networked Readiness Index, but I think we keep on saying, oh, we're number 3 in Sweden, but yet if we look at things like business and innovation, skills and government usage, we're really poor actually. So if you break down these measurements, it seems like there are a number of areas where we're lacking behind quite seriously. And if we believe in all these sort of projections in terms of how work life is changing and automation is having an impact on our work life, we should be worried. This is the McKinsey numbers. You know, some say 50% of every job will be automated. McKinsey says that 60% of all work tasks can be automated to a third. In their projection is 2040. So they say 60% of all jobs have a 30% part of it that can be automated. So they have sort of, but it doesn't matter because obviously no one knows. But it happens. Exactly. And the other part of it, I think, which we also should discuss, this is a prediction from Forrester. We predict that CEOs will exit at least 30% of all their CMOs, their marketing directors, because they will not be capable of coping with all these new work tasks. So there's not only automation, it's all this sort of transformation of work skills that are needed. And obviously it scares people. And obviously we're going to get into a situation where people are reluctant to adopt new technology because this is not a nice picture. And I think, therefore, it's so crucial that we have more positive images of where technology can take us. And this is, I love this movie, you might have seen it. It's from the Drive Me project in Gothenburg. And it's about, obviously, self-driving cars. But what's so interesting with this movie is that they've not focused on the technology in the cars, but instead what will change in our cities when we have autonomous cars. What would be the benefits for each and everyone? They can drive straight, so we can have more narrow streets, more space for people to walk on. We don't need as many parking spaces, so we can have parks, we can have great services, etc. My point is, we don't have that many visions about where technology can take us that has this whole of society approach. And unless we have that, I just think it's worrying that people feel just outside of this change. They don't feel like they're part of it, and they don't see how they will benefit. And I think this naive language is pretty nice too, to be honest. But there are so many areas where we don't have this vision. Health, what's the vision for health? How can it improve lives for everyone instead of people being scared of being part of a data system where people can see everything? Okay, I have to move on. I just want to make one more point, and that's about cities, because I think it's the same thing. This is a quote from MIT City Lab, But just the power of when we can measure everything, how we can change cities. And I jumped this slide and I just summarize with this slide. Because it's the same thing. I think we have to prove to people how things can be better. And this project in Chicago was that they call Open Grid, where the intention is that every citizen can see exactly what's going on in my street, in my neighborhood. Things that are invisible to the eye, but data knows. Exactly what time will the garbage truck enter to my street? Exactly why is this lamp broken and when will it be repaired? How do the kids feel at school? What did they eat for lunch? And by the way, were there any crimes in my area last night and will they be solved? That sort of information that's always present, which means that people can be more involved in the city, but also that service providers get a much nicer possibility to do things efficiently, like this project in Finland where they've just decided to RFID tag the trash cans and thereby obviously can have much more optimized routes, and they say 40%. They have 40% less climate impact. Finally, the project in Copenhagen, which is not yet realized, but still in the plan, to build a recycling station where the station would, through sensors, experience if people have not been very good at recycling in Copenhagen. And by using data, they will know today's been a bad day. And thereby the idea is there should then be this like 30-meter in diameter big ring sort of produced by the factory that will be sort of spread across the city like a giant sort of you have not recycled, be better kind of communication. And yes, it sounds a bit stupid, but it's so interesting if aggregated data will give immediate feedback to people. What happens when we're not individually doing things that are collectively good? Because we can make things communicate and we can give that feedback, and maybe that will change things and it will change people's view on their part of this transformation. All right. I think with those words, my time is out. So I just want to say thank you for me.
Thank you very much, Sara, for a really interesting and somewhat touching speak. It makes you a little bit worried. But what do you do in order to not let the worries take over?
But I'm extremely positive and optimistic. Did it sound very worrying? I'm sorry. No, I think the opposite. I just think technology is absolutely needed to solve both democracy issues and environmental issues and health issues. Unless we sort of proceed, those things are never going to be solved. So I think, therefore, it's so important that we get more people on board, that we are more inclusive. Because if we get reactions, which I do think the political tension can sort of drive, that would be very bad for us, because we need to move in a pretty fast speed. So I'm super optimistic.
Great. Good to hear.
Yes.
And what kind of ball would you like to put here? Where are you most
I don't have to judge my speech. This is like my...
what are you doing in your daily work?
No, I don't know if I do that, but I want to.
You want to. That's the most important. Yeah, great. Do we have any question from the audience? No? Okay, so
there's one.
Okay, there's one. Okay.
I'm Olof Schellén from Luleå University. We have a lot of choices as users of all these technologies, and sometimes you have the feeling that you join something because everyone else is doing it, without reflecting over environment and political issues, or whether it's fake or whatever. Yeah. So if you compare to other goods where we have a lot of information to make a good choice. So what do you think about this direction? Is there something more that could be done to make us make better choices?
Yes, actually, it's a great question. I do think that's a worrying part, especially when we look at information and knowledge and the way we now consume information without knowing why it's served to us. And I think that is an increasingly important issue to discuss. And I guess the only way to solve it is to have more knowledge and information about algorithms and why this is happening, and so people and users understand that what I'm reading right now is not sort of the worldwide agreed upon view on this issue, but instead something that is extremely targeted to me. And people don't know that, and it's very worrying from a democracy point of view. I think it's extremely worrying, and I do think the elections we've seen is a result of that, because people get very divided and scattered pictures of the world. So yeah, the only way there are numbers of ways to solve it, but the best way is probably to educate everyone, so everyone is more aware, I hope. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Sara. And we will give you a small gift. It's a backpacker.
Wow.
And a backpack. And it has been evaluated to be the best one. I don't know, but you will have to find out yourself.
Is it green? Is it ecological?
I hope so.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.